To paraphrase a popular career title, what color is your digital forensics parachute? What path are you on currently? Is it the one you want to be on? And how do you know when the field might look very different in 5 years? Welcome to the Forensic Focus podcast, where monthly we interview experts from the digital forensics and incident response community on topics ranging from technical aspects to career soft skills. I'm your host, Christa Miller. Careers in digital forensics and information security is a hot topic right now. Gaps in skills, gender, and representation from underprivileged communities are all being discussed, and to some extent even debated. With us today to talk more about that is Douglas Brush, an information security executive with over 26 years of entrepreneurship and professional technology experience. Doug is a globally recognized expert in the field of cybersecurity, incident response, digital forensics, and information governance, and serves as a federally court-appointed special master and neutral expert in high-profile litigation matters involving privacy, security, and e-discovery. In addition, he's the founder and host of his own popular podcast, Cybersecurity Interviews. Doug, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Christa, thank you so much for having me. Pleasure is all mine. I've been a long-time Forensic Focus fan and contributor, and probably started my career there.
Oh, I love hearing that. Thank you. That's good to hear. So in the 10 or 12 years since we first met on DFIR Twitter, how has digital forensics and your personal path in the industry changed? Have you seen any surprises?
Yeah, it's funny. I was telling somebody yesterday that I feel like we are still solving a lot of the same problems, but with that, when I coach and mentor people, I'm like, but there's a whole bunch of other new problems too. So it's this weird dichotomy of, still dealing with things like SMB v1 vulnerabilities, RDP port issues, just bad password and credential management, phishing emails. I mean, that was my first, I think probably my first investigation 12, 15 years ago, was doing, phishing investigations. And hell, that was probably the still stuff I look at. And it's a problem that doesn't go away. Yet, on the other hand, there's a wealth of new technologies that offer their own challenges. When you look at things like microservices, cloud services, containerization, there's just a new set of issues that come up with that when dealing with how to respond and heck, even how to detect when there's an issue, where to alert it, how to gather that data and information. It's not one of those where you can easily sometimes just go grab that telemetry information about that particular data source. It might be in another data source that you don't have access to, and then conduct an investigation. So, while there's a lot that I would say, there's still some underlying core principal problems when it comes to poor design, access controls, user awareness training. On top of that, you added new technology. So while there's new problems, some of them are just based on a lot of the old issues that we haven't solved.
So last year, you were on a panel at Techno Security in Myrtle Beach talking about certifications and how they either drove or were driven by career choices. And so going back to what you were just saying about those changes, you moved through different tiers of core vocational or tool-specific certifications, advanced and managerial. It seems like there's a chicken and egg thing going on there. Which comes first? Are certifications sort of, given the landscape that we're in, dressing for the career you want versus the one you have?
It'd be a little bit of both. I think it's how you approach certifications. And a colleague of mine that I work with, who's a peer of mine, heck, he's probably got some more industry experience than I do. He and I work together at Splunk, and he's another Doug, so of course a great name, but Doug Lahota, and he and I were talking about certifications, and one of the folks that I'm mentoring actually later today is taking and I'm a mentor on the Blue Team Village for DFIR through DEF CON, and one of the folks I'm mentoring, he's taking a CISP exam today. So I was walking him through yesterday, how did you prepare for your CISSP, or what did you do? Part of it is learning how to take the test. And I think that goes for any certification exam, is knowing you're going to be stuck in a room for 3 to 4 hours, sometimes in a very uncomfortable room. For example, just a sidebar a little bit, when I was taking some of my early CompTIA cert exams, 10 or so years ago for Network Plus and Security Plus, it was hot as hell in this room in January in New York City. It was a box. It was a testing center. And so imagine like 13 floors up and the small rickety tables with bad lighting, no ventilation, just cranking old school pre-war heat in a building. It throws you off. And like, yeah, you want to know the material, but you almost have to be like in a testing mindset. So that's one aspect of it, you know, when you learn how to test. I think it's also incredibly important to, on the other hand, really do kind of absorb the material. Like there's certain things I was telling Doug about and this other gentleman I was menteeing. It's like, when it comes to things like the OSI model, it's an incredibly dry subject, particularly when you get through layer 1 and 4. Like learning how to do IP subnetting is god-awfully boring to me. But if I didn't have to learn it for an exam, I would have never sat down and forced myself to learn how to do it, because you really have to know how to do it. And you get some value in that. And so there's some aspects of getting ready for certification exams that you should take away as, you know, what can I get out of this, not just to pass a test. So, you know, there's got to be some core things that you're never going to learn unless you sit and you practice for it for an exam, and use that as a takeaway and try to retain that knowledge in a way that you can actually make it meaningful in your career. I mean, overall certification should be viewed as a driver's license. It shows that you have, and I'm stealing this from Rob Lee, but it shows that you have the minimal viable skills to perform that task. It does not mean that you all of a sudden, because you passed your driving test, you should be driving a Formula One car. It just shows that you're hopefully you're not going to kill somebody when you take this thing out on the road. And that's kind of how you should view certifications, is that it gives you some base groundwork, but there's still a lot of work that needs to get done. And so in that, I really emphasize when people get certifications is to look at it in kind of an ordering principle of, all right, what are your core foundations? What can you learn from that? Talk about intelligently, add on to that specific areas of career paths, whether it's going to be DFIR, whether it's going to be blue team and SOC, whether it's going to be threat hunting, whether it's going to be red team, auditing, whatever other kind of fork that you go off of that base of learning some of that core knowledge, and kind of get ready for that and mindset around that as your career, and then say, okay, what's the next viable cert that I might want to get that I can learn something from and looks good on paper. Because I've seen people also spread out their certs in too many areas, and it doesn't build a cohesive story of what they might have core knowledge of.
Which was actually going to be my next question. What is the balance between being a generalist and being a specialist, especially given this rapidly changing landscape?
Well, I think it's so funny that they asked that, because my title at Splunk is security specialist, but it's really to be a polymath of security.
Yeah.
It's like I'm really good at knowing a lot of things 80% of the way. Like I'll never be the best red teamer hands-on keyboard guy. Do I understand all the key principles, can design a cold pen test exercise and kind of guide junior analysts and senior analysts? Absolutely. But when it comes to writing, a new Metasploit package, not going to happen. Like probably learn it, but I don't think that's the most valuable use of my time. So I look at that too as a bit of time arbitrage, is, where does it make more sense to be proficient enough to get that task done, and where are the ones where I really do need that deep level of expertise? And there's been times where I've kind of waned in and out of that in my career, where there have been times where I do have to know how to manually parse an MFT table, because I might be asked about it when I was doing a lot of testifying, and a lot of things that had really core technical skills. I just needed to learn that down to greater depths. And again, it's like riding a bike. I can probably refresh on it, but it's difficult to just say at one point, hey, I'm going to have to know this the rest of my career. Things change. And so I think part of that too is being flexible. At times, be a specialist in certain subjects. Take what you can from that. Don't get too beholden to it, but be ready to learn something new, because like I said, I mentioned with cloud technologies, that happens all the time too, where all of a sudden you might be thrust into a new arena of, cloud infrastructure, and then have to learn that very rapidly. And everything you might have known about core, networking and knowing about maybe Active Directory services might not necessarily apply one for one. And you have to be flexible and be ready to say, okay, I don't need to know that anymore. I have to go learn something new.
And on that note, you had mentioned earlier about telling a story of your career. Where do career changes fit in this? I mean, when you have those kinds of new technologies that come up that you have to learn really quickly, when somebody either has that kind of career change or is more planning a career change, how can certifications help with that? And how should professionals prepare? How do they get that hands-on experience they need to succeed with a given cert?
Well, this is where I get to be the old man screaming out the window. Say, stay off my lawn. Get off. These kids today, they don't know how easy they have it. I used to have to walk through 10 feet of snow to my lab. Damn it.
Uphill both ways.
Both ways. But like I had to oh my God, my apartment where I had a small office in New York City when I started Digital Forensic Group and, first 10 years of 2000, it was hot as hell in that room because I had a server, 4 computers, all running my lab equipment because in a test lab, and I was having to learn things. Ironically, one of the first applications was learning Splunk, on these boxes, 1 a.m. in the morning. And, it was, now it's, like I said, because they can spin up a virtual machine and you can have on a MacBook Pro 10 different builds of different operating systems and set up a whole Active Directory environment and test things. So I think the availability to set up test and lab equipment is extremely valuable now. And I can't emphasize that enough for people that are starting or even pivoting in their careers. With things like AWS, Azure, GCP, you can go stand up cloud instances of things and for a low cost, start practicing, start learning. And there's a ton of things out there too. And SANS has a tremendous amount of resources for things, when you're looking to kind of hack the box and you're trying to learn some of your red team skills, which can also, help. Certainly, that's another thing is cross-training. It's a huge key component if you're in IR and digital forensics is, learn what red teamers do. But yeah, those things are out there and you can go test your skills on them and learn. And so do not squander those opportunities. That's the one thing that I when I mentor people, I tell them that you do not know how lucky you are today to have this access to so much test equipment and knowledge to absorb it all and really, practice on these things that are available, set up virtual machines and labs in your home and just break things. That gives you the most hands-on things because I think so many of us that have been doing this for so long started our career, and I joked about this with people on my podcast or just in conversation, that it started by fixing a printer or somebody's home computer. Somebody goes, I can't get this thing to work. You go, let me take a look at it. And you hack at it and you play with it because something should work, it doesn't, then you fix it and you figure it out. And then you become that guy or gal that, oh, he or she's the one that knows how to fix this. And then you go to that. And that's almost how you progress in your career and later in life in forensics and security as well, is you find something that you get stuck on one day. And I think there was a time even on Forensic Focus, people were referencing some either Mac or Yahoo email capture thing that I was still seeing even a couple of years ago that be like, oh, Doug, you know how to do that. I was like, I figured it out once. I posted kind of a how-to guide. I don't know if I'm the guy about that, but once you figure it out, people kind of lean on you. And that's how you eventually might find some specialization. Again, the careful on that is it has to be something you really enjoy. So if all of a sudden, you start with Mac forensics one day, because nobody else is either on call that day in the lab or it just that case lands in your lap, take some time to learn it, definitely get some depth in that. But, if it's not the thing you're really going to be passionate about, don't become that person in your organization that becomes that Mac person and you find that you hate it, but then all of a sudden, every single Mac that comes your way because you're that person. But set your guidelines very explicitly about what you want to do. And when you get those opportunities, if it is something you're passionate about, double down on it and really dig into it.
How about, we're talking about setting up different environments to test in and so on. It sounds like between that and the certifications themselves, there's a potential for maybe some funding challenges, especially if a professional is looking for their employer to pay for their certification or to, kind of shepherd them along that career path. What if that's not necessarily the direction they want to go in? Like, how do you counsel your mentees to kind of overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, funding for certifications is no joke. Most organizations do not have the necessary budgets when it comes to training individuals on core and even intermediate and advanced certifications that I think set a good level of return on investment and a prerequisite, particularly for advanced and junior level IR people. If you look at SANS courses, they're my kind of go-to. I feel that it's great that they're tool agnostic. The body of knowledge there is unparalleled, but it's a cost. And so organizations that have only $2,000 to $3,000 in training budget per analyst are going to have a hard time spending $8,000 to $10,000 sending somebody away to do full boat certification. When you add in all the costs of meals and hotel and things like that. So I get it. So what some of the things that I've tackled with this, so say for example, you do have to kind of go to that well and get the investment, is you really have to kind of think like a business person. And I think this is a critical skill that you need to develop early on in a career, is thinking about the business and thinking like a business person. Don't expect people to understand what you're doing on the DFIR side. Expect them to understand the problems that you're trying to solve and put it in their terms. So if you say, hey, look, our caseload's backing up, and I'm just struggling with a lot of these things that I'm having to either do repetitive tasks or spend an inordinate amount of time researching, doing whack-a-mole research on a bunch of different things. If I went to this 5-day course, it's going to accelerate my time to get the caseload through because I'm going to be more efficient. I'm going to learn skills that's going to allow me to do business faster and therefore generate more revenue. So if you spend $10,000, I think you're going to get this many more hours a year on me if you're in a billable hour thing. And that could be an incentive. Now, some organizations I've dealt with this will say, well, I don't want you to be faster. I want you billing more hours. Start looking for other organizations. Efficiency should be the driving key, not just running up the bill. But a lot of things we even did in that is when I did a lot of fixed fee security engagements. So say just arbitrarily like a $20,000 penetration testing engagement for a mid-sized organization, fixed fee. And I would reward the pen testers if they can get things done faster because I had a certain amount of hours and costs built into how much I thought that should take and, my margin on that. If they should do it faster, why not give them a share of that? And so by doing that, incentivizes them to say, well, shoot, if I learn these skills faster and I go get training, I can get more work done in a shorter period of time. We can have more margins and I can be incentivized to get a little bit of on the back end of that. So everybody becomes, look for those win-win situations where it's not always this zero-sum game of, wow, if we do this, we're all going to win and we're all going to get more money. So frame it that way. If you don't have those other opportunities, there's many other ways to kind of hack the system. And I'm using SANS as a particular example, but this can work and I've reached out to a lot of other organizations to do what I'm about to talk about, is offering training facilities or other types of things to facilitate community learning. So many of these organizations, SANS, X-Ways, Celebrate, you name it, has classes. And we did this with actually NewX. I'm just thinking through a whole bunch of them now. But where I went in New York City, particularly, was a really expensive market to get training. And when I reached out to folks like Rob Lee, I'd be like, hey, how come we're never seeing community training for some of these core IR and forensic courses in New York? He's like, it's too expensive, Doug. Like, we can't put people up in that. And I go, okay. And I went back to the well and I kind of hacked on that for a couple of years. And I finally got in touch with the community people at SANS. I said, how about this? I'll give you a 30-person training place in a conference room where you don't use that frequently in our office. You can have it for the full 5 days. Me and my team will help set it up, get the facilitators already. We'll help in any way with the class. We'll provide internet. We'll order all the food and lunches, make sure that's there. I mean, SANS will pay for it. And they were like, that's awesome. Thank you. Like, we can never find space. It's always too expensive. And I was like, it's for free. I go, the only ask is, I was like, can I get one training seat?
Right.
And they're like, yeah. Sometimes we can negotiate too, but I basically ended up with about anywhere from $60,000 to $70,000 in free training a year just by becoming a facility. And that program ended up being replicated in a lot of other areas. I ended up doing it out here in Denver. It's funny, some of the Denver community teachers would go out to where I was doing it in New York City, come back and say, I just taught at this place. I think you used to work there. I was like, yeah, I set up that program. He's like, oh, I knew I heard your name from out there. And I was like, yeah. So, and look, and then that I'm a big fan of giving to get. And that's another way too, where I built stickiness with inside the community, with inside these organizations. It gave me access to a lot of people. I was able to ask them other further questions about mentorship, knowledge. It's just any opportunity you can look to contribute and give. Don't always think of it again as this zero-sum game. It's like, how can I help somebody and do it almost unconditionally, and you'll see these things start coming back. I mean, be strategic about it. But it's a great way to try to find ways to get free training is how can I help this organization that's trying to struggle to make this happen? You know, again, whether it's facilitating, teaching, whatever, you can get a lot of free training out there if you put your skin in the game.
So in terms of giving to get, what is your take, and I'm cognizant of being a white woman asking a white guy, but diversity initiatives like Share the Mic and Cyber, what is your advice specifically to our white listeners on how to be a more responsive ally in amplifying the voices of our colleagues of color? How do we practice self-awareness and know when to step aside?
I'm going to address the elephant in the room, two of them. I'm going to start with the first one, that I'm a cis white middle-class male who lives in Boulder, Colorado. And if you looked at my profile picture on LinkedIn, you would never believe it. I know. I really look like some kind of awful howdy-doody eugenics experiment. It's just too white. And for a long time, I projected that view of success. Of that's what you look like, because that's what all my counterparts. And for me, is like being kind of a hacker mindset. I was like, this is how I get in organizations. I look as professional as possible, because the joke was always with my pen testers too. They're like, it's not fair that you can walk right into a building and sit down in front of a computer. I was like, yeah, because it's social engineering, because I'm using cultural and social norms to exploit vulnerabilities from, you know, the front desk down to the door guards. Hey, I forgot. I can just walk in a suit, white guy in a suit, can walk into almost any building in New York City. I know how to get into the elevator banks and all that. Nobody questions you, because it's usually somebody of color that's not going to speak up to a white guy in a suit. And that's a security vulnerability, but I exploited it to prove points when we were doing physical penetration tests. So that exists. Part of that has been amplified certainly by the current, the current political climate. Unfortunately, now we have leadership in this country that really has doubled down on this white of power stereotype. And it's made it incredibly hard for people that are not of that view, that don't look like me, to try to get a foot in the door. You know, it's immediately being associated with some kind of quote unquote movement. Oh, you're just trying to do this or that. And what I found most appalling, and have disassociated myself from some of those people that would say, when I started speaking up, accuse me of virtue signaling. I'm like, how? And this particularly happened on some social media post. And it really pissed me off, because I was like, the thing I had posted was, I was in the beginning of the pandemic, as the lockdowns had happened. I was like, for all the people that are sitting down out there complaining that, oh my gosh, this is so terrible, that you're quarantined inside your beautiful house with all these things and your family. Think about the people that are in the low income side of this spectrum, that might be in a financially, physically, or verbally abusive situations, or these kids that are in abusive situations. Like, before you start complaining, shut up. And somebody's like, oh, you're just virtue signaling. I'm like, no, actually, I posted that on an organization. I put a lot of time and effort into being a board of this organization, Her Justice in New York City.
Right.
Because I've always been very, altruistic like that, because I believe I've come from a lot of areas of privilege. My background has had a lot of diversity of people of color, gender identity, sexual identity, whatever. I've really had an amazing support system. So yeah, it pisses me off when those people get hurt by a current kind of political worldview. So don't accuse me of virtue signaling. So I kind of took that back, and then I really kind of fell almost to an imposter syndrome. Like, should I be saying anything? And I started thinking, holy, is this happening systemically now? Are there a lot of people like me that are feeling kind of almost shunned by these people that are just going to kind of try to bully them into not saying anything? And I said, you know what? Let me test the waters. So I started with this idea of covering a couple things, particularly neurodiversity, diversity, inclusion, and mental health, talking about the podcast, talking about it in my public talks now. It's one of my talk tracks. And really, I was fearful that people are going to say, how dare you, a white male of privilege, with everything that you have in your little castle in Boulder, are going to sit there and tell us how it is. And I was like, complete opposite reaction. Big sigh of relief, because people are like, thank you. We need more people like you speaking out. You're the problem. And until you talk about it and address it and own it, it's never going to change, Doug. And I was like, I've never looked at it that way. And so I cannot encourage people that have had the ability to walk into any building in New York City and sit down in front of a computer, open those goddamn doors behind you for other people, because it's not fair just because you look a certain way and you've hacked this model, that you should be able to continue to get that. I mean, if we're going to look at that with that hacker mentality, if we're going to see, okay, here's a vulnerability, let's patch it.
Mm-hmm.
We have to stop that, because when we talk about the talent shortage and skill shortage in this community and in this industry, it's not going to work if we try to mold everybody into the same kind of framework of what success looks like. So anyway, I've started this whole thing of like really kind of pushing diversity and inclusion. I love the Share the Mic and Cyber.
Mm-hmm.
On the next round of podcasts, I plan on doing 5 on diversity and inclusion, at least, like a series that are focused specifically on that.
Mm-hmm.
5 that are focused specifically on neurodiversity and mental health.
Oh, great.
Because if we don't talk about it, and if it's not people like me that talk about it, I don't think it's going to change. So it's almost become this fear to a feeling of obligation to have to stand up for this.
Mm-hmm. 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 And on that note, I mean, you've mentioned mentoring several times. You mentioned the career, the skills gap, and some of the other gaps that we're talking about. Talk to us a little bit more about mentoring. How does that factor into a digital forensics career trajectory? How should professionals identify and approach a mentor who seems to fit them? And what do you look for in a mentee?
That's great. Yeah, mentoring in itself is great for me, I should say. And I think great for a lot of people in the community, but you have to actually self-actualize a little bit. You have to really kind of want to do it, and try to find something more than about you in it. I actually came from a very good base of people that were kind of mentors and teachers. So I kind of grew up with that in the household. My parents were teaching at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, but they were always taking the time with their students to mentor them, hire their students on their consulting gigs. So these people almost had an apprenticeship in learning. So I spent a lot of time with that. And I was an apprentice at the time. I would go as a PA on video shoots with these students and see them interact with my parents. I mean, to this day, there's these folks that still reach out to me and say, your parents fundamentally changed my life by offering me insight on things. And that, to me, to have that kind of impact, is exciting. It's something beyond everything. I always ask people when I'm mentoring them and also hiring them, I was like, let's take money off the table. If money's no object and you have those needs met, what do you want to do? How do you want to give back? What are you going to do to make impact in your life and those around you? And because it's very easy, when people say, I want more money, and it's kind of a bike shedding moment of career path discussions. But I think, when you really look at it and, what am I going to do here in my time on earth and in my industry and with my family and with everybody else? So you really have to, I try to set that mindset up as much as I can with others as well. But, kind of going back, I mean, that's really what drives me, is this passion to make change in people's lives. And when it comes to, I'm going to start probably first with being a mentor. That's where you have to find outlets for it, and the appropriate outlets. It can very easily go astray if you do it kind of ad hoc. That's why I like organizations that have more specific kind of mentor programs. And it's nothing like overly structured like the one I'm doing for Blue Team Village. It's we set our own tone and pace goals, but there's some structure to it where we're holding ourselves accountable. So it's not something where I leave somebody out hanging, because likely what can happen is me as a mentor can get pulled into a lot of other things. When I'm traveling, all of a sudden I can have to be on a plane in Southeast Asia and overnight, I might have to cancel something and then cancel it again. And it's very easy for me to lose track of that. And then the mentee not have the courage to say, hey man, what the heck? Like you've had to change 2 things. And then that kind of wanes. So you really need to find organizations that there's some kind of structure and accountability so that stuff doesn't happen and you can hold yourself honest. And there's a variety of different ways to do that. And first, even like looking with inside your workplace, a lot of organizations have these kind of mentor-mentee programs, and it doesn't have to, actually, I'm going to jump to that right away, it doesn't have to be just about forensics and IR. It could be about your career path. It could be about other things. So, the more I think about it, I think there's less things I do in mentoring people in technical depth than I do about soft skills, humanization of themselves, sometimes just being a shoulder to cry on and say, what are you trying to accomplish in the next 30 days and really be more of a coach. That's kind of the way I look at it. It's not, I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to come in and say, here's the prescription. You need to be a better professional. It's more of this coach of, hey, you walked into my gym. Where do you want to get better? What are some of the goals? oh, I want to have my GSE certification from SANS. Well, when do you want that? Next year? Not possible. Let's set a realistic goal.
Okay.
And reorienting people towards realistic goals. And again, doing the smart, was it specific, measurable, accountable, and time bound, I think our response. Anyway, but if you look up SMART goals,
Yeah.
it's like how to basically hold, set realistic goals that you can actually achieve.
Right.
I try to hold people to that. Yeah. Really try to just, again, be, and even just be, again, like I said, sometimes be a shoulder to cry on. Just say, hey, what's frustrating you? What's not working? Vent to me.
Yeah.
Don't let it sit and fester to the point when you're sending off that nasty email that gets you fired.
Right.
Get it out of your system now, and let's find a more constructive way to work on it. Or somebody I was talking to last night, she's like, is this too passive aggressive? I was like, first of all, you're asking the wrong person. I was like, I totally appreciate it. I was like, you could have softened it and said something more along the lines of XYZ and taken passive aggressive from 11 down to a 4. It wasn't like a specific mentor kind of thing, but I thought about it in that framing of like, sometimes just saying there's a better way to do this is helpful. And when you're a mentee looking for that, that kind of guidance, again, look inside your organization. You'll find people that are specifically tagged as mentors, because many organizations have that kind of structure. If not, ask if that can be set up. Why not? Can't hurt to ask. Again, look for other professional organizations. Like I said, Blue Team Village, DEF CON has a great set of people working on that. It could be your local ISSA chapter might have something. It could be any number of things.
What kind of qualities are you looking for in a mentor, though? I mean, is it because there's got to be like some balance between finding somebody who's a good communicative fit without necessarily being an echo chamber?
Yeah. And sometimes that's going to take feeling out, don't, if it, I'm a big fan of understanding logical fallacies and cognitive bias, because you can trick yourself very easily believing in something. And so, the sunk cost fallacy or the gambler's dilemma is, don't think you have to keep putting in more time on something that's not working out, hoping that it's going to have this magical payoff at the next session. And so if you're working with somebody that's not jiving with you as a mentee, say, there's a professional way to say, hey, look, this is not a good fit for me. I think I need to find somebody else. Feel free to walk away. And so go back to your question. I think that's something you have to go in with that open mindset, because you might have to test it out a few times, find out what's going to work for your personality. But the things you're going to want to look for is somebody that, and it's against that chicken egg, maybe somebody who's already mentored somebody else, where you can talk to one of their mentees and say, how was the experience? But again, sometimes that's tough. I don't think there's it's not as, like I said, formalized in the industry. So you might not be able to get that. And somebody might say, well, it's been kind of ad hoc. But, kind of also look at it, is it somebody that's had similar backgrounds and skills? And this goes to me too. One of the things is I've struggled with that horribly, because I've always been the bull in the china shop. I get brought in most organizations, I get hired. And then after I'm hired, they're like, can you write up a job requisition for yourself and a job description? It's like, we know we had to get you in, you have some kind of vision, but you write it up. And so it's very difficult for me to go in some type of entrepreneurial or leadership kind of role and then have to figure it out and then turn around and go, gosh, all these people are depending on me. I feel stressed out. Who can I talk to? Oh, I don't have anybody. And some of the mentors I have had were then unceremoniously executed or fired in front of me. And I was put into their position, a battlefield promotion, which was incredibly traumatic to have the one person and then have to search out. And in that process, I found out it doesn't always have to be somebody in a hierarchical kind of situation. It doesn't have to be my boss. It doesn't have to be a senior person. It could be somebody that's just a good sounding board that can, again, call me out of my logical fallacies and my biases when I'm believing my own BS. It goes, Doug, I want to professionally and respectfully disagree with the way you're approaching this, and say, no, you're wrong. And I found that, and maybe in little bite sizes with people that I've built around me as being mentors to me, even if they're lateral to me, below me in a reporting structure, but somebody that I can find as almost sounding board and really say, hey, thank you for, providing this advice to me, even if it's just a snippet. Heck, I've even found my daughter, who's only 10 years old, but, she's really good at calling, because I hope I've taught her well and calling me out on things. And I'm like, in a way that becomes a mentorship relationship where she's just like, kind of holding me accountable. And I think that's the overarching thing is finding somebody that can really kind of hold you accountable, that can see you through your eyes and call you out on that. And so I just recently, like, very lucky at Splunk, they have a professional mentor and coaching program that they gave us. And it's like, God knows how much like I would have to pay a year for it. And when I looked for a list of mentors in this program, it was like, similar backgrounds, similar kind of walks of life. And I picked somebody who was a perfect fit. I got lucky out of the gate. We've had some online sessions and, just gave me good coaching advice and kind of held me accountable to some things. And I think that's, it has to be what I'm looking for out of it too. And I think maybe to end that is to say, set some realistic, expectations about what you want out of it and be open about discussing that with your mentor.
Last question. The pandemic introduced a lot of uncertainty into our lives, even as technology itself is on this continued rapid pace of change. And so as we're talking about mentorship and getting that advice, how are you advising people to chart a course now? What opportunities exist for professionals in this field, especially if they've been disadvantaged or from disadvantaged backgrounds, but also in general? You're talking about mental health and other issues that I think the pandemic has introduced in a big way.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to unpack there. And I know folks who I try to, again, informally try to mentor or help, like, well, I'll just, some folks, and I'm in various Slack channels, between Slack, Discord, group chats. I'm run out of too many communication platforms, but, somebody who I know who's in the local Denver community, who's not been in work for a while and has said, I'm struggling with the mental health. I don't feel motivated sometimes to even go look for jobs. And I'm like, gosh, it's a double whammy, right? So what I've tried to encourage those people to say, okay, well, let's step back and look at what's changed in business because of COVID. Again, think of things in business terms. Where are things going? We've been talking about it for a long time that there's going to be this massive shift to cloud infrastructure, cloud computing. We've seen, I don't think the remote workforce thing is that much a surprise to anybody that's helped CIOs or CTOs or CISOs. Really, when you look at the way technology's been heading, has been in this direction, and things like hoteling and the ability to work a couple days from home per week, it's not been uncommon. So we've been kind of gradually going there. I think this just ripped the Band-Aid off. So within that advantage, all of a sudden you have this now a massive rush to people working remote and using cloud compute services. So it's like, okay, how's that going to change the dynamic of businesses? So more businesses are going to move to cloud services, containerization for their applications that support their workforce. What are some of the security issues that are going to come with that? What can I learn about that? Luckily, again, most organizations that are cloud first companies, and luckily Splunk is one of those, will offer free training around those platforms and services. AWS has an amazing amount of certifications that you can get for free by going in and doing that. Pluralsight is spinning up things in AWS training and Azure training and GCP training. So you can learn a lot of this stuff remote at home. Do not squander that opportunity. While it sucks to be not in a classroom learning this, because that's how my learning style works best, it's an advantage to a lot of people that might not like that socially, who might not have the financial means to do that. Where, yes, with a laptop that I can beg, borrow, or steal, don't steal it. But, I can sit there and learn some of these AWS courses and become certified in this and show that kind of those proficiencies and knowledge of those stacks and practice it. So there's a lot to be learned out there around cloud technology, because that's going to be the new technology going forward. So even folks like myself that have been doing, when I learned NT 3.5 back in the day and how to set up, original forests of Active Directory, that stuff's kind of thrown out the window. That space in my head needs to be vacated, and from memory to now learn about cloud stuff. So I'm starting at the same point as a lot of people entering the industry when it comes to learning about DevSecOps, when I'm learning about cloud stuff. So it's greenfield for everybody. Take that advantage now. And, as things kind of got a level playing field, yes, there's a crisis, but don't let it go to waste. Learn about this stuff and how people are changing due to this, and figure out ways to secure and respond to security incidents in this new type of business workflow. You can really set yourself apart. And this is opportunity, again, where you can write and publish things. I'd have to say, I've been a big fan of a couple things I would love to see kind of evolve out of this. My retirement goals is to do more work in a way, but I would love to fundamentally change the way that we do recruiting and hiring, and just basically do blind resumes, no names, no stuff that I would use as a hiring manager that can taint my innate biases, because it happens.
Right.
When you
Right.
see names, whether it's an African American name, an Indian name, a Chinese name, is that a white woman, is that a black, you there's so many things that I don't want to even have to think about as a hiring manager. I don't want that on the resumes and CVs. So I want to screen them for that. If it's well written and well presented, then I want to test them out on their skills and then go into some kind of testing thing. So my hope is that's going to drive more of that type of hiring practice in the future, where it's blind interviews and then testing cohorts of how people really apply that knowledge of what you need them to do on the job. And then if they happen to be whoever they look like, whoever they marry, who cares? They get the job done. And that's what I would love to see come out of this. But that's kind of happening now, where because you're submitting a lot of these things remote, leverage that, leverage the system for your advantage to say, hey, this is a remote thing. And, maybe I don't have to go in person and have to be scrutinized to this bias. Again, double down on what make that demonstrative and get a job on it.
All right. Well, Doug, thank you again for joining us on the Forensic Focus podcast. We appreciate your time.
As always, anytime. And I have to say, Forensic Focus has had a place in my heart, and what Jamie's done for, I've been on there for 13 years. I feel old now. But that's where I got to meet people like Rob Lee, you, everybody that I still talk to today within the industry, Lee Whitfield. That was originally his one. It's such a cool community, and that's the best thing. Folks, please be part of the community, give back. Forensic Focus is a great thing that if you see a problem, this is what I did early on. People would post a problem. I would go research the hell out of it and post a response. I learned something. I gave back. Win-win.
Yep. Thanks for that last piece of advice. And thanks also to our listeners. You'll be able to find this recording and transcription along with more articles, information, and the forums at www.forensicfocus.com. If there are any topics you'd like us to cover, you'd like to suggest someone for us to interview, please let us know.